Hey, hey, hey! We're back with another map analysis video. This time it's Sanchez by JD40 and Quadratic. You might recognize those names from being involved in some of the other maps that have at some point or another been added to the game. Of course, Biome being one of the main ones for JD40's pedigree. This map, well, it has organic rock textures, and Source has pretty much never done this properly, so I can't say I'm surprised that we have some interesting visuals, but once you get past that, I think the map's layout has a lot to offer. So we're going to be starting in T-spawn with my mom, you know, as you do, as usual. And one of the things that I noticed about T-spawn was, this is something that I think I've talked about to varying degrees, but particularly in the Iris video, I talked about, you know, save spots and different areas that you can position yourself in. And I just like the fact that you can even come all the way back here and save, you know, as either a T or a CT. Overpass teaches us many things, and one of them is that the value of hiding around in various positions can be quite high if you're trying to hold on to guns, especially in the economy that we find ourselves in today with CS. So, something to keep in mind. We just got some various interesting signs. Okay, cool. So, there's a couple of different areas that you can go to. And initially, this map, you just looking at the layout, you might be inclined to think of this map as a typical three-laner, you know? But we're going to dispel that myth just by walking through the map here. We're going to go to A first since it's to the left. And as we wind our way down here and bypass this tree, you'll see that we now have two positions open to us, as well as a very notable open area on, like, almost a heaven for this particular position, right? An upper part to the A bomb site. Now, that is at the same level of the actual bomb site where you're going to plant, and I'll show you the rest of the pathways like this one a little bit later on. So we're going to go continuing down over here. I'm not sure what kind of boost magic you would have to try to complete in order to get over here. Like, maybe I have been able to land on here before. I just don't know exactly how, or maybe I'm hallucinating. So it doesn't look like you can actually stand on this. Maybe you could run boost over there, which could be kind of interesting, or maybe a three-man boost, depending on like how elevated you can actually get. But it does seem like it was deliberately designed to be very difficult to pull off, and to the point where it would actually be quite the investment to get up there. So I don't mind that. I think that that's just one component of this map, right? As we continue onward, we'll see that there's a couple of more opportunities for hiding positions and lots of angles to take. This very long, sort of elevated corridor, this is an example, I think, of how you can do a corridor well, in that the approach to the corridor has a lot of different things to consider. Potential areas where you're going to want to like smoke this area off. You're going to want to potentially, you know, throw some flashes, and you can play around this whole old machine there that has got a bunch of boulders in it. But at the same time, you're also playing around with elevation. So it's not like it's a straightforward corridor that's just going straight from one point to another with no variation whatsoever. This is actually a case where the mappers have decided to have this be an elevated thing. And that really helps to set this area apart, not only because at the end of it is a bomb site and a lot of angles that you're going to have to check, and at the beginning of it is a different area, like almost a certain kind of choke point that can't even really be used by the T's because of this elevated position. There's a lot to consider when you get to the point where you're going up here, and so this almost acts as a relief point or a break point where you know you got to be careful of any rotations, like any wide swings coming out over here from the CTs as a T coming up here. You got to be careful about that. But you also know that it's like mentally preparing yourself for the next angle you're going to take. And it's like a subtle touch, but I think it's nice because it does allow you to know that there's like a known quantity associated with this, but at the same time you are being elevated, so there's the potential for interesting gunfights over there. It's just that very clearly it's not biased towards the gunfights being at that position. This is an obvious area where a lot of utility can come into play. You can throw some grenades down here if they've passed you by. You can throw some smokes to stymie any push, but it's not like that's the only option you have, and we'll get into that as well from the T side perspective. But this is the bomb site. One of the things that I found rather interesting about this map is just how far back some of the bomb site positions actually are. So you have to plant a little bit over here, but you have a lot of freedom in that respect. So you could come straight out here on a rush of sorts, going up there almost like it's Inferno on the B-bomb site of that map. And you can just come straight in here. You know, it's a much bigger bomb site in that respect. You can also come straight over here and plant on the edge in this area should you rotate in through mid. And furthermore, you can go all the way over here The fact that the bomb site is so wide allows you to have a significant advantage as a T if you position yourself properly and you learn this map, because there's so many different post-plant angles that you could potentially have. Another component of this is that a lot of these surfaces end up being bangable. So as you can see there, I mean, that's going through 2 or 3 walls in that particular respect. So you imagine, like, I go ahead and I plant here. I don't necessarily have to expose myself. I can just do a lineup over here, something like this. I think that should do it. And it's a little bit hard to track, but it would be annihilating anybody who's potentially over there, right? So there's a lot to consider in that respect. You can do a lot of things in that particular area, and I think that that helps a lot to add a little bit of complexity, right? It's sort of like if you have a wall bangable spot but nobody uses it, it's almost like that ridiculous philosophical question of you know, if a tree falls down and nobody hears it, doesn't make a sound. It's if a wall bangable spot can't actually be used for anything, is it really worth putting into your map? Is it really a wall bangable spot at all? Because part of the reason for it to have utility in the first place is so that you can actually use it to bang. And if you can't bang, then it's just a sad day. But the fact that you're able to do stuff like that is pretty cool, and I think it's something that is worth pointing out for this particular map in general, not just in this bomb site. There's a lot of positions for that. I mean, this one seems like an obvious case. You'd probably want to line it up around there. And that's a situation where if you plant here, like this might even end up being the default plant, especially if you end up having CT control, but you will also have to worry about the potential of somebody coming in from the CT position and banging you out that way. So there's a couple of different layers to that. Certainly a large portion of the map's design seems to have gone into the idea of giving both teams a fair shot at handling certain things, and essentially using certain elements in a fair way. Now, obviously, this is the CT position, and this is going to fly in the face of that last part that I was just talking about, because like I said, it's very difficult to actually leverage this position from a T's perspective. But if we are coming from the CT position, which is over here, and we were to go all the way back to the A-bomb site and jump into this area, we can see that there's a couple of different lanes that are afforded to us. It's almost like this area itself offers 3 different lanes of engagement. We could go all the way down here or lurk from an upper position to this elevated little corridor. We could obviously come over here in heaven, and then we have to watch mid because of the rotations that is possible to have. Notably, you don't have a line of sight on a T who's just like hugging this area, right? I mean, I suppose in theory you could have a line of sight. You could see them if you were all the way over here, right? Because you're actually able to see this last little bit. But in theory, just a flashbang or some sort of smoke lineup that locks this off would require a drop down, would require you to be very out in the open anyway, just to even get that. So I could imagine some pistol round strat or something like that, where you've got some dude with a pistol who's just like sitting over here watching for any rotation and then tries to like duck backwards because he's not anticipating being one-tapped. But yeah, this is the mid side of things on the A side of the equation. And this little area over here is where you're going to see T's come out of. So it's like this little shanty bar or whatever. And you got this situation coming in from the T rotation. They can choose to jump into here and get into an elevated position at mid and potentially wrap around, particularly if they were to drop a smoke or something like that to prevent them from being sniped out by anybody else holding mid. Now, the thing is, I do believe T's would probably be aggressing out mid, but this is a situation where you could come out there if you were worried about something like that. Say everybody went all towards A, then you could do something like that and then wrap around, and suddenly this guy is out in the middle of nowhere with no cover if he's trying to hold from the elevated position, which is one of the reasons why I think it attenuates the concern that this map might have an imbalance towards CTs in this area, just because you can flank it super easily and then they're miles away, it feels like, from actually being able to do anything. This is just another rotation to the A-bomb site from CT, something that will most likely come into play at post plants or just be part of your opening pathing to avoid running into your teammates if you are trying to take a mid or A lean position. That's something that you would do as a CT. Then we can jump on over to the B-bomb side of things before jumping into mid. Obviously, the CT rotation into mid kind of requires you to go through B or through A, depending on what you want to do. So this is the B-bomb side, and this is the rotation that I feel like most people will be using, even in the opening early pathing of the opening of a round. And you're going to wind up in a situation over here where this is essentially the mid position, elevated mid position. And if we come out here, we're looking towards T-spawn over there. Again, I'll show that a little bit more in detail later on in this video. Otherwise, you obviously have the position from B that the T's will use themselves. So if we jump back over to T-spawn, We can see the mid over there. We're going to jump over towards B. There's a couple of clipping issues that I wish were not the case over here. Like, as you can see, you have to aim quite high to get over the upper part of this area. This might have just been like because maybe they shifted some cover down or something and forgot to remove the skybox bit. It surely doesn't seem intentional, and if it is, there should be some visual indicator, but you can sort of line up some flashbangs over the side anyway, so it's not really the end of the world. You just have to be aware of that until a fix comes in, if one indeed were to come in for that particular problem. But that's something that I like, the fact that there's so many close quarters options over here. Now, obviously, because of the issues with lining up grenades in there, I'm not actually sure what would be an appropriate lineup here. Yeah, I think it would end up just getting bounced off anyway, but I was trying to find a potential lineup for mollying out this area. Obviously, that's not that big of a deal because you could flash it, but mollying out this whole area over here is certainly a must in case there's like a low buy and somebody's on a deagle trying to get like those short-range burst shots on you or anything of that nature. Maybe they've got a Nova because they're epic or something. This is a wrap position that's obviously a very long sort of straight line, but has multiple breaks in it, and one of them being the bomb site itself. I kind of feel like it's weird that we can't plant all the way over here on this bomb site, but other than that, I don't really have any complaints. I think it's, again, quite interesting that it's such a wide angle, and also interesting that you could go for a high variance play here by smoking and planting all the way out here. You almost don't even need to take site control in order to plant on this map, which I think is quite interesting. I'm also not sure if it's intentional, but you can plant up here. So that's another aspect of it that I think is pretty interesting. So in some cases, the indicators, they seem to be, you know, properly placed. The fact that you can plant down here is cool too. It feels a little unnatural to have to come in order to plant, but that could just be alleviated with some, like an additional art pass or something. Not necessarily a gameplay breaking thing or anything. It's just a personal pet peeve, I suppose. So let's show the background of B, that is up more towards the CT side. I imagine that you're going to see some late round rotations and mostly holds in here, which is kind of a shame because I do imagine this was designed to be a really cool firefight position. Not sure if it's even possible to bang through that. Doesn't look like it. But I really like the fact that there's, you know, so much... it's a different aesthetic in this area compared to some of the other parts. Obviously, part of the walls do look very, very similar no matter where you are. But inside that building is quite unique, I would say, even compared to the A-bomb site, which is also inside. And something that I think the developers did a good job of. It's just unfortunate that you're really only going to see people trying to do those wall bang lineups for post-plant scenarios, or they're going to potentially be in here to... you know, try to line something else up or whatever. So it could be interesting for sure to see some interesting lineups. Like obviously that's not going to go anywhere because of that oil tanker, but perhaps you could do something like this, and suddenly you're banging them up before they can even get onto the site. Like if you know where they're planted from, it could be pretty big. Doesn't appear that you can throw any utility throughout any of these areas. I guess maybe you could throw some weird-ass CT flash or something that would pop. Where does that pop anyway? Looks like up in the air over here. I don't know if that would actually blind anybody. Looks like it would if they were just staring at it, but like if they're doing something like that, it's a temporary blind. It still could be useful in a clutch, but I don't really see much of a utility in doing that. Like it's not a high percentage play, right? It's not something that's going to have a huge amount of impact every single time. And you're not even necessarily going to be in a position back there anyway for the purpose of trying to, you know, prevent yourself from like at this point you're playing retake anyway. So I guess you flash that so that you can take fights over here when you're approaching. In that situation, I imagine it would be quite similar. But I also don't know, like it's not like it offers you something that you can't do anywhere else. Like you could probably just throw this flash, even better potentially, over in this position, and maybe like it has less airtime, right? So like if I'm holding over here in an admittedly stupid position, you know, maybe I'm more over here. Yeah, I barely see that on the upper right when it pops. So that's a situation where that would obviously be a bit more useful, and that's something you just throw from the SWAT truck, so that's fine. But one of the things where I feel like maybe it's a missed opportunity in this area is to create a little bit more utility for actually being here in the first place. By having a couple of spots where you can throw some nades from. Not sure if it would make the site a little too CT-sided or a little bit too defensively sided, we'll say, because maybe a T that's positioned in there could do the same thing. I think that it's already got some value as, you know, a position where you're trying to hold for retake or whatever, because you can spam out wherever you planted the bomb from if you know the lineups and stuff. So certainly a powerful position there. Obviously, it goes both ways. You can get spams from either side. So in order to link up everything that we've been observing so far in this video, we're going to run through the middle of the map, and then I'll go through some stuff in a bit more detail, because I do think that some of these connections deserve a bit more of an exploration. But I think you've gathered what I think about the bomb sites so far. Once again, we are in mid, sort of T-side mid. There's a couple of different positions. This kind of reminds me of that wheelbarrow at bottom mid, like T-mid on Mutiny, which is another custom map that was added to the pool sometime recently. I'm not sure if it's still in the game because I keep forgetting to look at that. But ultimately, there's a little bit less maneuvering room. Like you can't... Oh, I guess you could stand up on that. I'm not sure if that's intentional. But you can't really do much with this unless you were trying to boost or something. And even then, I don't think it would be too useful. So I guess another example of sort of cover like this would be Mirage, top mid, cart, or whatever people call it now. And I think that that's fine. Obviously, I'm pretty sure it's very spammable. Oh no, it looks like it actually absorbs bullets quite well. That one doesn't. And that one doesn't. But yeah, if you're trying to shoot through all this stuff, seems like you're gonna need some luck and maybe a higher caliber gun. That being said, given that you're going to need to flash over or something to get an angle there, maybe the contact point is such that you've got a decent shot at taking an aim fight around here for both teams. So the CT perspective looks like this around this hay cart, That's a weird one, too, because there's like a slight elevation difference on this side compared to the Ts, who are going to be mostly flat. So I wonder if that plays to the CT's advantage, just because it's a slightly weirder angle. But that's something that people will adapt to over time if they were to play it. So that's fine by me. Otherwise, there's just some stuff that you can play off angles at if you were... CT holding, like say there's a CT stack towards the A-bomb site and we had one guy over there playing that angle, then you could have somebody over here holding for anybody coming out, and also trying to trade if somebody rushed out with the attempt of picking this guy. Like say somebody's over here and he's gonna like try to pre-fire that guy or whatever, and then that guy falls back. So this is like an Inferno B sort of bait setup. You could do something like that out here. Though, again, limited cover. I'm not sure how useful it would actually end up being. And, yeah. So this sort of connection we've already explored a little bit, so I'll go back up to the upper part because I still haven't shown that off fully. So this is where you would go if you were trying to wrap mid to B, which is one of the main reasons why it's so important that you have a CT watching this angle and hopefully catching them, depending on spawns. I'm not sure what the timing would be like, but you want to at least see if they're going to be wrapping so you can inform your B defense. And obviously I'm pretty sure that the spammable nature of a lot of this stuff. Let's see what that looks like. All right, obviously my lineups were very off, but you could imagine doing something like that, and maybe we would be getting somewhere. Oh, maybe not. I think maybe the elevation is just such that it would take a little bit of time. That being said, that hole in the skybox, or the hole in the in that area there on the roof, makes me think that maybe we could have some sort of grenade lineup to go into it. But I'm not sure. It doesn't look like it. It looks like the distance is too high. I'm sure some CTs would find some interesting nades to use. That being said, this being open is obviously useful for the Ts executing onto the site. I'm sure there's some smokes and stuff that people could find for that as well. And on the CT side of things, if you were going to be trying to defend this bomb site, that's one of the weird things about this map, is I'm actually not sure if you would even want to have too many people on the bomb site itself, as opposed to the connectors and the contact points. It's a lot to keep in mind, and certainly something that would require a bit of a learning curve. But that's one of the interesting things about this map compared to a lot of the other maps that people have played, is that while the bomb site has some areas for post plants, even the Ts, after they take a bomb site, mostly want to fall back into some useful positions elsewhere, or they want to set up a crossfire in like very specific circumstances. But if you're talking about like a full round scenario, it's very interesting to imagine where the CTs themselves would actually want to establish a defense. Because you'd probably have some guy holding up here and hopefully getting information from anybody who's holding mid about a potential cross, and he could sit like, over here. He could have like an off angle over here. He is very exposed if he plays a little bit further to the back of that room. He's very exposed to anybody coming out in this area. It's a constant pull, like push and pull situation, tug of war going on, where you've got to try to anticipate where the Ts are actually going to be going. And adjust your defenses accordingly. And because there's so many options, this is something I talked about in the Iris video as well, there's so many different options that you have as either a CT or a T in terms of which angles to take, where to position in accordance to your opponent and where you think they're going to come from when you're taking or retaking a site, which things to watch out for. There's so many options that the players have, there's so many decisions that can be made, that it doesn't really feel necessarily like, I think once you learn the map, it's not going to feel overwhelming in the sense of, like, I think early people who played canals early on, and even still now, there's like that sense that there's just way too many passageways and spots that I could be shot from. Maybe the wall bangable spots in this map would need to be revised and trimmed down so that only a few, less wall bangable spots were in existence, so that those ones could be made more impactful and played around. But at the same time, I think that there's a lot to be said for the potential of coming in with some preparation on this map, some knowledge of like some of the wall bangable spots. And for the most part, like I don't think you would feel like there was nothing you could do there because of a certain decision that was made by a player. I think you would feel like there's something that you could have done differently to, improve upon that. So, maybe make some different play. Or I also think that this map has enough flexibility that assuming you position yourself enough forward before fights are actually taken just to get information, the value of information on this map is quite high because of the rotation difference from different parts of the map. You can pull back and establish a defense and a crossfire and use utility to isolate certain things, right? Like if they're going to be coming through this little corridor over here, this little, brick house or whatever, you can actually molly this off quite easily because it's such a small contact point, which would normally be a bad thing for most maps, I think. But because there's so many different ones, you essentially have to pick which ones you're going to try to lock out with utility, right? And then you're saving less things for a retake should a retake happen. So you're almost deciding as a CT, do I even want to retake or do I want to straight up deny the plant? And the fact that the map allows for both of those kinds of styles based on its construction, I think is pretty cool. So there's a couple of different things that I think are a bit more obvious in terms of concerns that people might have, like the wall bangable spots being so numerous, and like some of the contact points being so small so that it might be a little bit difficult to get an entire team to path through certain areas. But given the number of situations, I think that's more of a concern that's born out of a decision that we make as a Counter-Strike community to, generally speaking, approach maps by, essentially excluding certain rotation spots and certain paths from the game plan. Like we just assume, okay, maps just only have 2 or 3 entrances into a bomb site or into a contact point, and as a result, I only have to worry about those 2 as a CT, and as a T, I only have to path through a couple of them, so they have to be wide. Whereas in this case, there's so many different ones that you can, leverage, so many different positions that you can, hop on top of or path through, that a small team of 2 in a couple of these positions can really just be whatever you might need in that sense. So I think, honestly, this is a map with a ton of potential. We won't know exactly how intense it ends up being unless it ends up getting, I think, a visual facelift, because this does strike me as a map that, unfortunately, Valve would say parts of it are not up to visual standards. That's just an assumption on my part. I think the thematic is great. I think it's a map that like a style or a theme for this map. We haven't seen this in Counter-Strike, at least not to my knowledge. Certainly not in CSGO. In my history with the game, have I seen a map that looks like this, that has this theme. And assuming they are able to tighten up the visual quality of the assets that are used, I think we could definitely see a really nice inclusion into the map pool. And that's sort of my take on it. And that's my opinion of Sanchez by JD40 and Quadratic. So check them out on, not on Instagram. I don't know if they're on Instagram, but check them out on Twitter. Their Twitter @ will be in the description. You can give them a follow. Aside from that, not really a whole lot to say. There's a bit of a shorter video this time around, but this is a map that actually, I think it's interesting about this map because its map size is not really that large necessarily, but there's so many different positions and so many different pathways that you can take. So it's dense, right? It's very, like the idea of behind this map that I would say is that this map has a lot going on in a small amount of space relative to some of the other maps that we've seen a lot of complexity from. They usually give themselves more space, more breathing room, but this map, I think it's paced well in terms of how long it will take you to go to certain positions and to get to certain bomb sites from certain positions. And there's a lot of counterplay to a lot of the different positions that we've seen. So yeah, there you go. That's it. And Mom, I'm home.